we're in a situation where we agreed that fentanyl and its precursors will be curbed substantially, and the pill presses. That's a big movement. We're reassuming military-to-military contacts, direct contacts. As a lot of you press know, follow this, that's been cut off, and it's been very worrisome. That's how accidents happen, misunderstandings. So we're back to direct, open, clear, direct communications on a direct basis. Vital miscalculations on either side can cause real trouble with a country like China or any other major country. And so I think we're made real progress there as well. Do I trust? I trust but verify, as the old saying goes. That's where I am. And, we're in a competitive relationship, China and the United States. But my responsibility is to make this rational and manageable, so it doesn't result in conflict. That's what I'm all about. That's what this is about.
And Mr. President, after today, would you still refer to President Xi as a dictator? This is a term that you used earlier this year.
Well, look, he is. I mean, he's a dictator in the sense that he is the guy who runs a country that is a communist country that's based on a form of government totally different than ours. Anyway, we may talk.
Welcome to What's Left, a weekly political discussion challenging the mainstream left. My name is Andy Libson. I'm a teacher and socialist here in Oakland, and I'm joined by Kenny Zepeda, who is a socialist out in Central Valley. We are online at what'sleftpodcast.com. You can find a link to our blog in the episode notes. Please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications, share your favorite episode, and jot down our information wherever you found this episode. So today you'll see that Eduardo is not here. It's just me and Kenny. But he isn't here. He is here in spirit, because this week's episode is going to be something that Eduardo wanted to actually do, but he can't make it, which is discuss the Asian Pacific Economic Cooperation meeting that's taking place very close to Eduardo, where Eduardo used to be, now he's in Colombia right now. I'm in Oakland, but it's here in the Bay Area. Joe Biden and God damn it, how do you pronounce this guy's name?
Xi Jinping.
Joe Biden and Xi Jinping have just actually had their 4-hour meeting together. And Eduardo thought that since this was happening near us, we should discuss it. And honestly, I wasn't that thrilled about it, because I was like, I don't really want to discuss this stupid meeting. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought maybe there is something worth talking about here. So Eduardo's not here, but the idea for the meeting is, the idea for our discussion is, so that's what Kenny and I will be talking about, is APEC.
So yeah, and I didn't know much about APEC until this meeting was elevated in the news, right? Like as something significant of these two heads of state of competing nations meeting after so much fallout, at least in the public eye, since the last visit of Xi Jinping to the United States, which was in 2017, I believe, with Trump. And so ever since then, so many things have happened in the and the view of the world, in the news cycle. I wrote some stuff that I think has happened. So significant things that have happened since then. So Nancy Pelosi went to Taiwan, if you remember, and that became like a tense moment. There were like military maneuvers by China around the island to do a show of force. The spy balloons, right? Like the claim that the Chinese sent some balloons to spy on the U.S. territory. COVID, the origins of COVID, obviously that's massive, and the Wuhan lab and all that stuff, and obviously a lot has happened since COVID, but among other things, there's TikTok, right? Like there's been an attempt to ban TikTok because it's a Chinese it's Chinese technology, and the claim that they are collecting our data, right? The Chinese, and they're more evil for some reason than our own ruling class. Other things, Huawei is one of the major technology, technology producing companies from China, right? And it's banned in the U.S. That I know those cell phones, for example, are very popular in Central America, and I suppose in a lot of poor countries because they're affordable and they're like smartphones. And Ukraine, Israel, fentanyl. So a lot of things have happened, and these two haven't seen each other in person, and so that's why it's been in the news, and that's why I decided to look into what's this about, what's APEC. Maybe we should start with that.
Yeah, and I think it's not a throwaway to say Ukraine, because since the war in Ukraine started, Russia and China have become much more entangled with each other, politically. And of course, since you started your statement in 2017, it would also be worth bringing up the national strategic documents that have come out in 2018 and 2022, which emphasize from the United States point of view that in 2018, it was Russia and China were the preemptive. It was no longer the war on terror. It was Russia and China seen as the big problems. And then 2022 national strategic defense statement pretty much singled out China as the biggest threat to U.S. Global dominance on the globe. So, and the cementing of of China's relationship, not just with Russia but also Iran, and the development of the Belt and Road Initiative that is continued, have all been seen as things that worry the U.S. rulers and U.S. capitalists. So all of that figures into this moment, and particularly with the in my opinion, with the U.S. losing the war in Ukraine and threatening and arming right now Taiwan and threatening a new proxy war in Taiwan. You have these two big leaders meeting together with the idea that maybe they can reach an agreement, maybe we can get away from conflict and things like that. At least that's how it's put out there. And I have some information about APEC, or at least a framework for talking about APEC that I want to discuss. So neither Kenny and I, we didn't pre-discuss what we're going to say about APEC. So Kenny, why don't you start with what you learned about this?
I mean, for me, the important thing is to kind of see what countries are part of this group, right? Because I thought it was all right, it says it's the Asian Pacific Economic Cooperation, right? Forum, is it a forum, I would say, or?
I mean, it was put together it was put together by the United States way back when. I just think it's a grouping of countries talking about doing common economic and then even possibly common security issues in Asia and East Asia.
And so, I mean, I'll name the countries that are part of this real quick. So you have Russia, People's Republics of China, Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, New Zealand, Australia, Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, Brunei Darussalam, the Philippines, Hong Kong, Chinese Taipei, Japan, the Republic of Korea, so that's South Korea, not North Korea. And then that's what I was impressed about. So obviously the United States, it's in there, Canada, Mexico, Peru, and Chile. So all those countries in the Americas are on the Pacific side. But I didn't know, that these countries like Mexico, Peru, and Chile were part of it. But did you want to say anything about that group of countries?
Well, to me, it's not so much the grouping of the countries as to the big issue for me is who started it. And this was launched in 1989. It was not an initiative of China. It was not an initiative of Indonesia. It was on the U.S. initiative, and the core countries that made up that initial initiative were United States, Japan, Philippines, Indonesia was part of that initial grouping, Australia, and I mean, I think it was the way it was seen by China very early on, who didn't join until 1991, was that this really was Clinton's attempt to create NATO in Asia, and in fact, I'm going to be quoting from this book that I read a while ago. It's by Doshi, The Long Game, and he talks a lot about APEC. And here's what Clinton's statement about APEC at the time. Clinton announced that the United States sought a new Pacific community and that the American agenda in Asia involved three goals: working for shared prosperity, for security, and for democracy. And Clinton went on to say another time, President Clinton had linked APEC to NATO himself in ways that shocked the Chinese. This is a quote for Clinton. We can't imagine now how we could have weathered the Cold War without NATO. In the same way, future generations may look back and say they can't imagine how the Asian Pacific region could have thrived in such a spirit of harmony without the existence of APEC. So while initially they talked about trade liberalization and economic stuff in terms of the United States initiative of APEC, it was clear that they increasingly wanted to talk about security issues together. And the U.S. was attempting to use APEC to, like they were saying, to create essentially not a North American treaty organization, but a East Asian and Asian security and economic alliance that was led by the United States. And so China got in there later, and they got in there, as this book argues, not to be like, oh, we really want to be part of APEC, but to basically blunt all the U.S. initiatives that were being taken up there, and to make sure it didn't turn into a NATO for them. So China has been one of the reasons that I was pretty convinced that there was nothing that was going to come of this is China's reason for being in APEC is to stop it from being anything that the U.S. can use it as a tool of dominance in the region. When I think about an organization that China is using to actually shape its role in the East, I think about the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which China is a part of, Russia is a part of, and so APEC to me is something that was a U.S. initiative meant to try to build control in Asia in the way that they felt like they had control in Europe. And China's participation in APEC has been to just stop them at every place they could, and to basically muddy the waters so that U.S. could not turn it into something they wanted that they could use to control Asia. I'll just say that.
And so my understanding is that the military component, right, like in NATO, is not existent, right, in APEC, right? It's more of like quote unquote economic, because literally in their website they say these are the participating economies, and so there's no mention about military action, and so you mentioned its creation under Clinton, the U.S., and that period of globalization, right, when that word became
right.
very.
And it was also the fall of the Soviet Union and by 1991, you're talking about Bush the first, talking about the New World Order that is going to come as a result of U.S. dominance in Europe with the collapse of Soviet Union, and then U.S. projecting power through the Middle East and into Africa and into Asia. That was the goal. That was the aim, and to turn the war in Kuwait, in the 91 war in Kuwait, into the sort of like centerpiece of saying, you either play ball with us or you're going to end up like Iraq.
And like to me, and obviously these sort of organizations are sold to the public in terms of inclusion, progress, globalization, right? Like again, because of that time period when it was created, the promise of bringing wealth and prosperity to everyone versus the strings that come with participating in this, because you're agreeing to certain things that often the U.S. is not beholden to, right? Certain treaties that are actually unilateral, they're not bilateral. The benefits do not come back and forth. And there are other organizations like this. Like, I know there's a Central America organization that includes Mexico, the Caribbean, and so in these economies, if they want to play ball with the U.S., they have to be part of it, or they're isolated economically. And then So what I'm saying is that this organization, in my view, it was created, right, to wield power economically under the threat. In the military aspect is in the background, obviously, but the primary goal is to subjugate the participants to an arrangement that benefits the bigger markets, which is the U.S. And I suppose that they could not deny the entry of China, because China was a massive economic power, up and coming in that time period, right, since it was created.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think they thought I think they were not trying to stop China from getting involved. I think they wanted China to get involved. I think the United States at that time thought that Pax Americana was inevitable, particularly after the Gulf War, and that's when China was invited to join. And I think that China has played. This is partly an argument made in this book called The Long Game, has played a long game role of slowly exposing to the United States making the United States believe that you can use us and that you can use China to your benefit, and slowly but surely turning that into something else, turning it into opportunities for China to become not just being used by the United States, but beginning to use the United States themselves and be able to compete with the United States. So what they have done is attempted to hide within themselves what their real aims and interests are, and their real goals, which were to compete with the United States, and ultimately, I believe, even though China will deny this, become the global hegemon that the United States currently is. I mean, I think other people think, oh, China wants to just share the world. I don't believe that's the case. I think any capitalist power is going to want to control the globe because it wants to control the resources, and Belt and Road Initiative is part of that. But I think China has done a pretty good job of sort of fooling the United States into believing that they're playing China, while actually China has been actually playing the United States. And I think that's China's entry into APEC was that U.S. thought would actually be a way of corralling them and binding them down so that they could use APEC to control everyone in that region and essentially make sure that there was an American stamp on economic policies and on security issues, which means how the military is deployed, and maybe even having U.S. military missions being done there, which was an aim of that. And China actually helped scuttle some of those things. And then slowly but surely, China would just basically time after time, and it goes through it in this book, stop the United States from getting APEC to operate in a way that could make it function in a form that the U.S. could actually push control on the economies in that region. So that's what China was doing. It was basically biding time and trying to make sure that the United States was not successful in their NATO plan, and they were. And APEC has turned out to be kind of toothless ultimately, and it was turned out to be toothless when there was an economic crisis in Asia. And that's good for China. China didn't want APEC to have any teeth. And what I think is really the lie under APEC is not the Asian Pacific or not the economic, it's cooperation. These organizations are not about cooperation. Everyone comes to the table, but most of them come with knives in hand. Particularly China did, and the United States did. And Russia, I don't think is even I think Russia has been removed from APEC or not allowed to come to this APEC meeting, because I don't think they're there in this. So I'm not sure their status there, but I think I remember hearing that Russia was no longer invited to be part of APEC.
I thought it had a representative there that made comments.
Okay, maybe they have observer status or something like that.
And so just wanted to add to that, that period, right, of China becoming part of APEC, and play that passive role, right? Like, in at the same time that they haven't been seen so much as a military threat. They now have the biggest naval force in the world in terms of numbers, right? Maybe they don't have the experience, of occupying and conquering territories, and they have their own way of asserting influence, but they haven't sat in the back and done nothing, right? And also their reach is not just economically, because you don't build a navy that big just to have it, for show and for peace. You build it because you're gonna have to use it at some point. And in the Pacific, it's a naval playground. It's a lot of water. In like trade routes and dominating it, or having the force to assert its power. And that's what they've been building naval bases, right, in different, constructing islands from zero. And asserting their force in other countries too, because there is a maritime disputes, right, with other countries, and where China has just pushed forward with it because they understand the strategic need of asserting its physical military power for the long game, right? Because there will be, a battle that has to happen at some point. Because again, you don't just build a navy just to have it around just in case.
Yeah, and China's navy is now starting to exercise. It was exercising, I believe, in the Mediterranean, or around maybe in the Persian Gulf. It was near where U.S. was putting its navy in Iran, or around Israel. So China was actually sending its navy in that region as well. So it is what the difference between the United States and China in terms of their navy is, even though China has a bigger navy, the U.S. is able to project force much more around the globe, and China is not yet capable of doing that. But it aims to, and it certainly aims to have a navy that will blunt the ability of the U.S. to control what China does in its own sphere of influence. And that really is the role of its navy yet. It is not yet a navy built in the way that the U.S. Navy is, to control all sorts of areas of the globe. And you have the globe broken up into 5 different regions or something. The way that the United States, I can't remember these different names that they have for different regions of control that the U.S. has. They have actually names for them, but they have different carrier groups assigned to different areas to control those regions, or to help control those regions. And now you can see how they've been bringing a lot of things into Iran. I mean, near Israel, to basically do the same thing and to threaten Iran and Syria, and to say, if you make any moves, we're prepared to fight you immediately. You don't have to. We're not going to wait. We're going to do it immediately, because we now have we have force right there that can make your lives difficult if you do something we don't like. The United States, at least.
And to me, it seems like also I see that China in the Pacific, the way the U.S. thinks of Latin America, its backyard, and just by geographical sense, I guess, because it's their immediate environment. Do you want to say anything about what's come out of this meeting?
Yeah, and I don't think anything came of it. I mean, what was the expectations were already getting lowered before it happened, and there's been these demonstrations as well, people talking about it. But the meeting was, basically, it certainly didn't do anything to build cooperation between the United States. If any, what did they come up with? Now their militaries were speaking when they didn't. The militaries weren't speaking before, as a result of Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan. Their militaries weren't speaking during that time. So apparently now the militaries are going to be on speaking terms again. So if they're doing something, they can talk to each other. I guess you could say that's something. And secondly, some agreement was reached about fentanyl, which the issue of fentanyl to me seems absurd, because I don't think of China, I think of our pharmaceutical industry as a fentanyl production factory. I'm sure China is involved in some way, shape, or form in that, but that just seems like a made up issue, for me at least. So if they reach an agreement about fentanyl, they reached an agreement, in my opinion, about nothing. And furthermore, it was just very interesting to have Biden like come out and pretty much say right after he had talked and been all nice with Xi Jinping to be like, well, do you still consider him a dictator? And he goes, yeah, he is because he is, and it's like, it's just ridiculous. I mean, the guy's a doddering old man. He probably didn't think it through fully. I don't think that's what you'd have wanted him to have said. And you can save them calling Xi Jinping a dictator for once he leaves the country, or, for wait a little bit longer. But it basically exposes that no agreement was reached on anything significant about Taiwan, about Ukraine, about Israel, about AI, because there was talk about AI being used to direct your nuclear weapons, and like maybe we shouldn't be doing that. And they couldn't reach agreement on that. All their talks are going to continue. And then on any trade issues, there was no agreement reached. But then, like I said, I don't think Xi Jinping was going to be going there to reach an agreement. I think he was going to go there to basically be like, and the backdrop to this is China's economy has been struggling. Their housing market is bad. Apparently, the amount they're not producing as much, so there's like a recession going on. And so some people were saying, "Oh, Xi Jinping is going to the United States looking to get his economy started by reaching out to U.S. businesses." Yeah, maybe, because he is going to have a meeting with U.S. businesses specifically, but I don't think he expected to get anything from Biden, and I don't think he was looking to do anything other than foil anything the U.S. wanted to do that would help the United States, and nothing came of this that would help the United States. And I think I don't know if China comes out as looking bigger and better, but APEC turns out to be a nothing again, and that's good for China because APEC is not a cooperation place. It was designed by the United States to be a group to allow U.S. to control the region, and so APEC continues to do nothing this year, previous years, and looks like into the future.
So, do you think APEC means something to the other countries? Because in their mission statement, right, and obviously that's what they claim to do, but they talk about things we talked about on the show, like digitalization of economies. Talk about AI. They talk about sustainability and environmental issues, and often we've talked about on this show. The use of this language is often masking, the destruction of the environment, social control. Do you think there's anything to that, any reality to this sort of cooperation?
I'm not sure. I don't think all these 21 countries, if you put Russia and China and the United States, there's no cooperation there. That's a competitive thing that's bent towards conflict. And a conflict is coming. It's already there, and it's gonna grow. But if you ask me what the Philippines could use for this, or Indonesia, I think it plays a similar role like the WHO, which is it provides political cover for rulers there to impose policies that they probably aren't that popular at home, but they can basically say, we need to do this because this is part of a program that all of Asia is embracing. They basically use these cooperation organizations to push policies on their own people, to say, well, everyone else is doing it, we got to do it too, kind of thing. And this will help us. This will help us as part of a trade liberalization, and you'll have more opportunities to get cheap products from so and so, or we'll have more opportunities to export our products to so and so. But in the end, each ruler gets to figure out which part of the APEC policies they can use to essentially get over on their own population, and that's what I think they're doing. Because I think APEC's strength comes from the United States, and the United States has not been able to utilize it in the same way that it's been able to utilize NATO and turn it into a weapon for itself. So China has been successful at making APEC meaningless globally, but the member states probably still have a role. It probably are still part of it. One, to please the United States, for those who are who are concerned about that, like Japan and Australia, possibly the Philippines. And then they also can get to push policies that they say, well, we don't have control over because we're part of APEC, and we have to do this because we're part of it. That's what I would imagine.
And it's obviously there's these countries, blah blah blah, but there's also for me like a more local view of this event as well, because something that the first reason I knew about APEC was because San Francisco started doing I guess sanitation, quote unquote, meaning cynical, because there's a massive homeless population issue in San Francisco, and as a result of the COVID policies, that happened, and so in San Francisco has a massive PR issue. I think we talked about it on the phone. It's something that's in my mind, and so in the background of all this, of an event that doesn't really mean much, right, in terms of the big players, doesn't do anything. There is the facade of a local government or local ruling class of San Francisco in portraying, something to the world while, enacting policies on their own population. Like I asked my brother, who still lives in San Francisco, he was telling me that he actually heard that. Well, he works in downtown, where most of the homeless population resides, and he told me that they actually pushed him towards BART, in order to get him out of view. That's what, because my partner, she worked with this population in the thick of it, and we were wondering what happened. Where did they send them? In the underground tunnels, the train tunnels was where they pushed them. They allowed them to be there during this meeting. Well, they erected fences, these massive fences. Obviously they have two heads of state that are super important, I guess. And to me, this is like a metaphor of what APEC, right, like represents, on a global scale, and also like on a local scale in every country, like you're describing, right? Each ruling class doing what they have to do to control their people, in order to maintain power, and also keep good optics, right? Because that's why they when you go to the mission statement and all that stuff, they use the same bullshit language that any organization uses, right? Inclusivity. Blinken went to this event too, right? He was talking about inclusivity, and let me see what a quote of him is. Okay, sorry. Okay, so this is something I read from the website that quotes Blinken. He says, each of us recognizes that inequality within and between our countries hinders the growth of our entire region, and that more inclusive economies are also a stronger economy. And he goes and continues. Again and again, throughout this year, from Honolulu to Palm Springs, from Detroit to Seattle, and now in San Francisco, we've heard that citizens, the people we represent, are hungry to help build that more resilient, more sustainable, and more connected future. This is what Blinken is saying, the emissary of war, and, destruction. And again, it's like, this language that is so pervasive in a city like San Francisco, with profound issues, destitution, in the extraction, really, and really, like, San Francisco is the epitome of the future, I believe, many countries participating in this, and the world, fences, hiding the poverty that it creates through its economic policies, hidden under state of emergencies, right? We've argued, right, in the show, that obviously they were full of lies, and so I don't know if you have.
No, and it's interesting you bring that up, because Blinken is partly just talking in what's it called, in this grand language. It sounds nice, but it's bullshit. But in reality, there was a disagreement between China and Russia. I mean, China and the United States over this, and China scuttled it. There was an article that I read that basically said China objects to U.S. bid for APEC to shift trade and investment principles. That's the title of the article, but I'll read it here. China is objecting to a U.S. proposal for Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation members to incorporate sustainability and inclusivity into their trade and investment policies, a source briefed on negotiations said Wednesday. And to me, this is meaningful only because this is exactly what China does all the time with the United States. U.S. is bringing up principle, inclusivity and sustainability, which is underneath it is somehow the U.S. is trying to get their foot in the door, their hand on the wheel of the Asian economies using this kind of language. And China says, no, we don't support that. We're against that. And so what happens? This thing got scuttled. Like no agreement could be reached. And earlier, when the U.S. had tried to get APEC to not be making decisions by consensus, but make them like democratically, if you will, like you get a vote, things like that. China scuttled that way back in the 90s, said, no, this is a consensus organization. If one member says no, then it doesn't happen. And China said no. And so that's what they've been doing, like over and over and over again. And so APEC is not there it's not about cooperation. It's about bringing your knives, bringing your little contracts that you're going to use to try to get somebody to become subordinate to you. And it's about the other person trying to take out their eraser and saying, no, we're not going to do that contract. And so this is Asian Pacific economic competition. That's what they should name it. And the same can really ultimately be said of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, except that there's more cooperation there because when the U.S. asked to enter into Shanghai Cooperation Organization, China said, no, you're not allowed. Then U.S. asked for, well, can we just have observer status? No, you cannot. So they won't even let U.S. there. And this is very interesting. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization started in 2001, right? Around that time, and the U.S. is on a new round of projecting power. And it started with Russia and China. And listen to this language when they're starting the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. The themes Xi, the Chinese ruler at the time, and Putin, who were meeting at the time, emphasized with respect to resisting American hegemony, appear in virtually every Shanghai Five and Shanghai Cooperative Organization statement. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization came out of the Shanghai Five, and so he notes this. These are the things that are said basically in every Shanghai Five statement and every SCO statement. Many of these documents and speeches phrase these goals in terms of promoting multipolarity or democratizing international relations, which are euphemisms for reducing U.S. influence. The texts often decry, as they put it, the U.S. human rights pressure, neo-interventionism, and missile defense. It was at a 1997 Shanghai Five meeting that China and Russia signed the Declaration on a Multipolar World and the Establishment of a New International Order. The agreement stated that in spirit of partnership, the parties shall strive to promote multipolarization of the world and the establishment of a new international order, and that no country should seek hegemony, engage in power politics, or monopolize international affairs. So this is back in 1997, prior to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, talking about multipolarity, talking about fighting U.S. hegemony, and this is the language of today. So it's not just U.S. that has plans for these things. Other ruling classes have plans, and you can now begin to see them putting them in play. What are we talking about now? We're talking about a multipolar world. When we talk about a multipolar world, we have to understand that as a political victory for China and Russia. And that's how they see it, because they were looking to create a multipolar world to basically say, no, we're not going to have one hegemon anyway. We're going to get in there. Now, everyone thinks this is about peace when we get the multipolar world. It is not. It is a guarantor of war. Look, I'm not for U.S. hegemony. Of course, we got to take down our own government. But there should be no illusions that a multipolar world is going to be a more peaceful world. The multipolar world that China was looking to build back in 1997 was a statement of, we're going to take down the United States and we're going to be able to have a say in the world once again. And so That's what's happening right now. The U.S. knows that when multipolar is used, that it's set as a threat to them, and it was known then, and it's known now.
So we've talked about this how things are changing, right? Like the U.S. hegemony is being challenged. It's been I think it's been cracked in different ways. And but there is people who make the argument that it comes I think from that globalization world, the neoliberal idea that economic ties will secure peace, right? Like this notion that if there is economic interaction, that will lead to a more peaceful world. There is economic ties between China and the U.S., right? We still get a lot of product manufacture over there. I read recently that China it has its first foreign investment deficit, right? Like where money is being taken away from China, and so there is some money going out. And I'm sure China knew this day was going to happen. I don't know if it's like a pattern, a long-term pattern, or a temporary situation. But what do you say to that argument? That there is these economic ties will lead to peace in the world, and do you see any cracks on those ties that rupture slowly, or there's an abrupt
I would just say that the world that went to war in World War I and World War II was economically interpenetrated. U.S. traded with Germany, U.S. traded with Japan. There was all sorts of things. Like they were trading until they weren't, and so that never has. That's the sort of thing has never stopped wars. I don't actually think that's what people mean when the people who have this fantasy of multipolar peace. What I think they're saying is the U.S. gets taken down a peg politically, economically, and militarily, and then becomes a level playing field, and essentially thinking that there's this level playing field that all the parties will sort of balance each other out. Folks, that ain't going to happen. The U.S. is not going to lose peacefully. That's a loss. That's a defeat for the United States. They're not going to accept a situation like that and the only way they will accept a situation like that is by virtue of economic, political, and military defeat, or revolution in their country that basically takes the question out of their hands. That is it, because they're never going to accept not being the global hegemon. That's why everyone's always thinking that these neoliberals are crazy. They're not crazy. They understand that if you are not winning, you have to change the game to try to get an advantage somewhere else. That's why they've got Iran right now in their crosshairs. They know they're losing in Ukraine. They know it's not going well in Taiwan. They're just thinking, okay, well, maybe we can get something going here. And because they know that unless they can turn the corner on this, they're going to continue to get defeated, and then they're going to have to do something very dramatic to change the game. And the ruling class, U.S. ruling class, is worried about that. They talk about it in terms of Russia. They talk about it in terms of China. But I think they know that if things don't get turned around, well, the U.S. has already said they're perfectly. They said in their own national defense strategy, we reserve the right to use nuclear weapons if we must, even if we don't face an immediate nuclear threat, even with some sort of electronic countermeasure could be the basis of using it. So there was no way U.S. and China were going to reach an agreement on AI and nuclear weapons. No way, because they're all looking to develop their own AI so they can get over on each other, and that's going to be part of it. So that's why this data collection is going on. So we don't live in a cooperative world. It's just not that. So I don't. That is my critique of the multipolarism that people believe, and they think that capitalism can exist in some sort of peaceful equilibrium, and it cannot. It is always tending towards monopoly. And if it's not U.S. monopoly that's being built, then it's going to be China's monopoly that's being built. And once China's monopoly is being built, there's going to be another power that's going to emerge that's going to try to take it down. I personally don't think we're going to get through that, because I think nuclear conflagration prior to that. But Maybe there is a World War IV. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think there lies a critique that I have against like a lot of people who call themselves Marxists, or but in line with the Chinese project, right? As a project for the new world, that's the new society that you know they see that as a vehicle for changing the world for the better. Um, and again, but it lacks the understanding that this world. Well, wait. So the argument goes that China is doing things differently than the U.S. They're not invading countries yet,
Right.
And so they're more peaceful in the peaceful form of capitalism, I argue. In But that will lead to peace, but that leaves out the reality that they have to. That's why they built the Navy, the biggest Navy in the world, because they have to be ready to assert themselves when push comes to shove, right? I mean, that's what was at stake in Ukraine, right? Like that's why Russia called the gamble, because that's the reality right there. When you have to draw a line, you have to be willing to do what Russia did.
Yep.
We're being pushed against the corner. And so again, just to add to what you're saying, like, yes, that's the world I see too. It's not a world that reaches a balance because there's someone with supposedly higher values. No, everything is underwritten by violence in this system, and they all understand it. Even though they portray the democracy card and the inclusivity and the human rights bullshit. At the end of the day, they're gonna have to bomb and destroy and use whatever country, and make them Ukraine or Palestine, right? In on the road to victory,
right?
And like these are the first pieces on the chessboard, right? And but then like you said, if they're losing, if they're not, they're gonna have to do something dramatic, like flip the whole table and see what happens. Because if we're losing, might as well find something else.
Correct. And it's not because these people are just dedicated to violence. It's because capitalism demands that when you have two opposing sides whose competition cannot be resolved, well, its competition can't be resolved peacefully. If one side doesn't lose economically, decisively, then the other side is going to have to use some tool, political or militarily, to resolve this. There's just no way around it. And so the reason any country is going to use its military is to resolve political questions or economic questions that are decisive for its existence or for its growth. And that's just why a military exists under capitalism, is to allow the various states to resolve these things in their favor. And it's not a question of military-industrial complex. These things aren't there just to support people getting rich within the military or Raytheon, although that happens. There's all sorts of ways that people take advantage of this stuff. It is because violence is the decisions that are made are underwritten by violence. And it's violence imposed on the working class, but through a repressive apparatus of the police and jails and prison system, or internationally of its own military. So that's how things ultimately really are decided under capitalism. And if you don't have a big enough military to decide, then you've got to find a benefactor who you can skate with, where you can get a few benefits. But you're never going to be a major player unless you have the power to do violence to somebody else and make them yield to you based on that violence.
And that's what happened, right, in the Second World War. I mean, there was a sort of a convenient cooperation, if you say, between the Soviets and the Western powers, that lasted until the war was over.
Yep.
And then the Cold War happened, which is often spoken of as if it didn't have created a lot of destruction. It absolutely did. A lot of people died in those decades by proxy. A lot of battlegrounds in foreign lands. And so whether we see the ultimate battle immediately, right? Like because we don't know. We keep saying World War III, right? But we don't know when. It can be a year, it could be tomorrow, it can be 10 years. But we know that based on this analysis that this system is just inherently unstable, and it's chaotic, and even though they seem to put measures in place to prevent sort of regional and global catastrophes, of like war. You don't know what can trigger that. That's what we've talked about, right? Like the missiles in Finland, or Russians are afraid of having missiles in Ukraine that are operated by automated systems, right? That because something can trigger a war, and like the response with modern technology is out of our hands, right? And so again, like whether it's a death by 1,000 cuts, right? Or an immediate sudden collapse, more battles are coming, because these powers are, China is no longer sitting in the background pretty, and their hand is going to be forced too. They're going to be called to battle. They won't forever sit behind Russia, doing the dirty work, because that is again a to me a also temporary arrangement. We don't know what can happen afterwards, between those two, because they each have their own ruling classes, their own interests in, sharing in this system. It's not stable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So nothing came of APEC that was of any meaning. The world, I believe, continues to move towards ever widening war. And no way APEC is going to do anything. It doesn't even offer a speed bump to it. And in fact, we have our president who literally hours after talking with Xi Jinping calls him a dictator. And it's interesting. I don't even think China responded. I don't even think they were like outraged. I think they were just like, whatever, and in fact, I imagine they look at it like, oh, you are a decaying power. You don't even have a leader who can speak. It must give the Chinese a lot of confidence that they're going to be able to defeat the United States. And I think China's just trying to figure out, how do we do that without setting them off into some crazy nuclear war scenario that ruins everything for us. And I think that's the thing that China's trying to figure out how to do. And it won't be able to figure out how to do it, because I don't believe it can, because there's no riddles. The only way to solve the riddle of capitalism is revolution. That's the reality. It does not get solved by some capitalist ruling class figuring something out. So that's my opinion.
Do you think there was any value for Xi Jinping, in coming to the U.S. As in terms of like China, and they're like depicting him as a statesman?
Well, I think it shows that China is willing. They know that I suspect it does in terms of world opinion. And since the world seems to be shifting more in the direction of China and Russia, it shows everyone knows that the U.S. is trying to turn Taiwan into another Ukraine, to screw with China in the same way that Ukraine is screw with Russia. And everyone knows that the Ukrainian population has been decimated for U.S. global hegemonic aims, and that U.S. is about to do the same thing to Taiwan. The fact that even while the U.S. is doing that in Taiwan, a Chinese leader can come over and try to like make peace, if you will, and be like, I'm willing to come over and try to cut a deal and make a deal. That's going to make them look more statesman, more like willing to cooperate. And the fact that they have a leader that at least knows not how to like make a fool of themselves, that's going to be better for them. I mean, in terms of like putting together the jigsaw pieces of the globe, and which side will have more pieces of the puzzle on their side. I do think it ultimately helps China. But in terms of the world, I think it's another step in the direction of war, inevitable war. And both sides even said it. Both sides even said, maybe we can reach agreement now because it looks like we're coming into a bigger conflict later.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know much more to say. Do you have any questions or?
Last thing I would say is, did you make anything of these demonstrations? Personally, I didn't pay much attention to them because it was like, tastes great, less filling. I didn't even like this APEC meeting doesn't mean too much, but it seemed like more part of the theater of the event, and to actually try to give it more importance than it actually has in terms of what deciding anything. And but I'll be honest, I didn't pay too much attention to anybody's side in terms of these demonstrations.
I mean, it was used as a vehicle for the people who feel strongly about the Palestinian case more than any global, at least that's my sense from, what I've seen and read. I know that there was a blockade of the Bay Bridge, major bridge, right? And for hours, they detained the traffic and to advocate for the Palestinian cause and blah, blah, blah. But, I mean, again, I said in the last show, I'm a cynic about this because, I heard a protester that, because they were protesting outside the Democratic headquarters, Democratic Party headquarters. And one of the protesters, very animated, that seemed like the type that I used to organize with and, the quote unquote radical. But she was talking about, we're demanding from our elected officials to do this thing, so as much as they, want to be radical, they're still, very much entangled in the partisan politics. There is no independent organization. And so I expected some sort of demonstration. I don't think anything significant will come out of it.
And I guess if I asked myself what would have gotten my attention, it's not like all these stuff was walled off, penned off with fences, and everyone seemed to agree to accept the fences, and all these demonstrations took place outside the fences, and police were beating people up outside those fences. To me, the only thing that would have gotten my attention is an attempt to break through the fences.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. That's the world that they're creating more and more.
So if there was an attempt to break through those fences and get the people inside, I think now you've got my interest in terms of that demonstration. Like, oh, that's interesting. So, I mean, that's where we're at now.
Exactly. I mean, the fences are just accepted, and they're getting taller because I saw the ones they built, and I'm like, damn.
Yeah. But if you're protesting outside the fences, then you're pretty much have already accepted the terms that the ruling class has set for you. So I think at this point, that's the only thing that would probably get my attention, is something that doesn't accept the ruling class terms.
Yeah, I mean, they were very safe.
Yes.
They came to.
So, I mean, our side still hasn't decided to make war on their side.
Yeah, I still think the dominant current is still, like I said before, like the Palestinian cause is going to become part of the election somehow. Even though like it'll probably be some sort of dump Trump, fight Biden bullshit that they used in the last election. And so I don't know. I haven't seen anything that really makes me think, okay, this is something, just like you. Like again, I'm just too cynical now about some of this stuff.
Well, let's see. Hopefully, Eduardo listens to this episode. Eduardo, this was for you. Hopefully, you enjoyed it as well as our rest of our audience. But we'll see what people make of it and see what people say. But I am glad we had to look at this more deeply.
Yeah, I am too. I mean, there's always more than meets the eye, and that's why it's important to talk and figure stuff out. Yeah, because I definitely learned stuff that you looked at. So.
Yep. All right, Kenny. Well, thanks for be part of this discussion with me, and hopefully Eduardo will be back next week. That does it for this week's episode. What's Left is a weekly political podcast channel challenging the mainstream left. We post information about our topics and our guests on the episode notes, wherever you found this episode, or on our blog, what's whatsleftpodcast.com. You can find past episodes of this podcast channel there and connect with us. I remind people, if you like anything you've heard, please subscribe, rate, review, and turn on notifications to any of our 8 platforms: Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, Bitchute, Odysee, Rumble, YouTube, or Telegram. If you would like to give us feedback about something you've heard or suggest something for us to cover, contact us through our blog. So that's it for me, Andy, and Kenny. Hope to have you all back next week, and we'll see what we're covering then.